What is bicycle trail? Is it good? Is it bad? Do you want low trail or high trail? That's what I'm going to do a deep dive on today's episode of the Bike Whisperer. Welcome back, Pathless Pillars. And if you're new to this format, this is where I take the time and really go deep into a bike concept to hopefully help you guys understand what I'm talking about when I do the bike reviews. So full disclosure, I'm not a bike builder, I'm not an engineer, and a lot of my knowledge about trail has been from internet reading and also just riding many bikes, taking notes on what the trail values are, and trying to associate a specific trail number to ride feel. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. What is trail? I'm going to give you guys the technical definition and then a little bit more of a layman's understanding to help you decipher it all. So if you look at the images that I have up on the screen here, particularly this one that shows more trail and less trail. Trail, essentially, if you take the head tube angle and draw the line parallel to the head tube to the ground, and then draw a line from the center of the wheel and bring it perpendicular to the ground, that will give you a measurement known as trail. Obviously, from the image, you can have more of it, you can have less of it. There's other things that affect a trail number. One big one is wheel size. As wheel size grows and as it gets smaller, that will also affect the trail number. So I know what you're thinking, there's this arbitrary number, what does it mean? And that's a lot of the thinking I've been doing over the last couple of years. I'm trying to kind of explain this concept of trail. And I've spoken to several bike builders, several people in the industry, and many of them have told me that the trail number is probably the best kind of objective indicator that will help predict how the front end of a bike will ride. So that's why I talk about trail in the bike reviews, and that's why we ultimately created the bicycle flavor wheel. So if you look at the bicycle flavor wheel, there is no industry standard, I think, with regards to what is low, middle, and high. This is kind of from my experience. So I'm placing low trail between 30 to 50, and when the bike has a trail number that low, some of the feelings you may get is that it feels a little twitchy, it feels a little nervous, a little over responsive. And again, these aren't meant to be negative descriptors. It's just kind of, if you ate some food and called it spicy, doesn't mean it's good or bad. It's just what it is. And on the flavor wheel, I place 50 to 65 to be kind of mid-trail in my opinion. It's definitely on the more responsive side. I think most endurance road bikes fall within that 60 millimeters of trail range. And basically I consider 65 to, and beyond as higher trail. I think there is kind of a mid-step there that I would classify as mid-high, so 65 to maybe 70, and then from 70 onwards, it just becomes its whole different thing, basically a mountain bike at that point. So when you get trail numbers that high, the steering feels a little less responsive. You definitely have to counter steer more with your hips, let's say, but the upside is that it does feel more stable when you're going down descents, and that's why mountain bikes tend to have higher trail. And to illustrate this further, I went on Instagram. We're looking at the Bike Insights Instagram account, and they did this cool graph, if you're a bike nerd, that shows kind of trail numbers and what types of bikes, what classes of bikes usually fall within given trail numbers. So as we can see, low trail bikes, clearly low trail, 31 to 44. Again, these aren't like industry standards. These are based on different preferences. Paved road bike, again, 54 to 66. So this is bikes like your Trek Madone, your Emonda, your Specialized Tarmac. So purely road-oriented bikes tend to have trail numbers within this range. And as you can see, as we get into mixed terrain road bike, aka the gravel bike, the trail number increases. It starts to veer a little bit away from just the pure road raciness in the front end to something more stable. And this makes sense, right? Because if you're riding gravel roads, there's a lot more road imperfections, soft spots, sandy spots, rocky spots. And maybe at that point you don't want a bike that is super responsive. You want something that will you want something that will stay on its line better. And when we see this progression continue, as the trail numbers increase, we get closer and closer to mountain bikes, which, as we all know, they're designed to go downhill at speed over rough terrain and maintain a good sense of stability and control. So I love this graph. Hopefully it gives you kind of a 10,000 foot view at trail, what kind of bikes fall under what trail numbers, and how that affects steering. That said, there are other things that I think affect front end handling. We mentioned tire diameter. As the tire gets larger and smaller, that will affect the trail number. But I think also tire patch. There's something about a wider tire that just has more grip, more friction that will either slow down or will speed up the steering. Another thing that can affect front end handling that isn't reflected in the trail number is a handlebar width and a stem length. If you think about a mountain bike, as we saw, they tend to have really high trail numbers, but that's kind of counteracted by the shorter stems and the wide handlebars. The shorter stems put less weight on the front, so you're not cantilevered over the front of the bike, and the wider handlebars give you more steering leverage. So yes, mountain bikes have high trail, but it's also compensated by the fact that, the steering inputs are a little bit different. On the other side of the spectrum, if you look at a performance road bike, it tends to have a lower trail number. But if you look at how the pros set them up, usually really long stems, 100 millimeters, 130 millimeters, riders really cantilevered over the front of the bike. That tends to work to help kind of counteract and balance out that over responsiveness in the front. So as you can see, it's kind of complicated. Trail is definitely a good starting point when trying to figure out how a bike will handle in the front end. But it's not the only data point to consider. There's lots of things that go into the front end handling. Okay, so next I want to talk about something that a lot of people may not realize and something that doesn't get discussed a lot. Within the size range of one bike, just one bike, the trail number will change. Aside from subjectivity, that's one reason why two people can review the same bike and have completely different experiences, especially if the bikes that are being reviewed are on opposite sides of the size range. So a good example here is we'll take the Crust Bambora, which I have in the background here. And one thing I really like about the Crust Bambora is that it's actually kind of on the higher side of the trail. It's really chill. It's got a short rear end, kind of road-like, but almost a mountain bikey front end. And I ride the size small. So if we look at the size small here, the trail is 76.5. So that totally jives with my experience with the bike. As you can see, as the bike gets larger, the trail actually changes. So it goes from, at the smallest size, which is 80, which is very high trail, very stable in the front, all the way up to the extra large, you have a trail number of 69. So that's a pretty big shift. And I think if you were somehow able to fit both bikes, you would be able to tell the difference in the front end handling. And I know what you're wondering, why is this the case? Typically, when bike manufacturers make a size run of bikes, they usually use the same fork for the entire size range, and it has a fixed offset. If you think about this, part of this is just it's expensive to create different forks with different offsets specific to each size. So what most brands do is they'll pick a fork, pick an offset, and kind of play with the head tube angle so you don't get toe overlap, and ultimately that ends up affecting the trail. And we actually see that pretty well illustrated here on the Crust Bambora. If you look at the head tube angle on the extra small size, it's 69.5, so fairly slack, right? Or relatively slack. Not mountain bike slack, but on the slacker end of the spectrum. Road bikes tend to have 73 degrees. That tends to be the classic head tube angle for a road bike. And as you can see, moving up the sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, the head tube angle changes to a slightly steeper but significant 71 degrees. Again, bike design, from the bikes I've ridden, it's a matter of millimeters, matter of half degrees that can make sometimes a big difference in how a bike handles. So we went from a slack head tube angle to a slightly steeper one, and that kind of reflects itself in the trail since the fork offset is the same from, kind of a very high trail bike to a lower trail bike. Not a low trail bike, but a lower trail bike. All right, so hopefully that made sense, gave some insight as to why front end handling can change within the same model bike, but in the different sizes. So that's why it's kind of significant when a brand says, hey, we made different offsets for the different bike sizes to keep the ride feel the same. I think in my experience, larger brands will design for medium and large, and riders that ride in the small, or extra large don't get the actually intended experience. We get kind of the collateral damage after everything's been adjusted to make sure the bike still rides okay. Interestingly, if you want some more kind of fun reading on low trail versus high trail and all that stuff, I'm going to link to this article by Analog Cycles. I think they're a bike shop, but they really go into this whole low trail and high trail thing. To really quickly sum it up, the person that wrote the article argues that low trail was a function of less about handling per se and more about getting the toe out of a rider's wheel. So it was a solution to a problem rather than the goal in of itself. But it's a fun read, gets really nerdy. Encourage you guys to check it out if you want to do a deep dive. Which kind of segues into the final thing I want to talk about is low trail versus high trail. Which bike for you? So like many of you, I've been influenced by Jan Heine and really wanted to explore this, the magical properties of low trail. And again, to just quickly summarize, it's quicker to steer. The steering feels generally lighter, more responsive. And because of this, when you put a load on the front of the fork, it doesn't tend to be as floppy and still maintains that kind of road bike like feel despite having a load. Of course, the counterpoint to this is when the bike is unloaded, it can feel overly responsive and overly twitchy. So I think generally that's the argument for a low trail bike, is that it stays responsive with a front load. The argument for a high trail bike is that it's stable at speed and at descending. Again, think motorcycle. That's why motorcycles have a really high trail, because once they get going, you want that stability on the freeway. Negatives of that is it takes more inputs to steer. So if you're trying to dodge a road obstacle, you have to be more cognizant, look further down the road to make those adjustments. Another kind of downside, which I felt actually with the Bear Claw Bo Jackson, is that at slower speeds, a high trail bike has more wheel flop, and that was definitely what I was experiencing going up a rough climb with a front load. The bike it was a drunken goat. It took a while to adjust, but it was hard to pedal it in a straight line when going, like 3 miles an hour. I've ridden both and I own both. The Polyvalent has a trail of 40. The Brompton has a trail in like the upper 20s, I think, so it's the super low trail bike. And I also have a Salsa Cutthroat, which tends to be a high trail bike. And this is what I think. I think you can have many tools for different jobs. I think some bikes definitely excel at different types of terrain than others, but ultimately you will adjust. If you give it a half dozen rides, your body will adjust. The human beings are just very adaptable. So unless you have a very particular preference on the trail, I think that you shouldn't sweat it too much. Definitely try out bikes, see what you like. I know for me, if I'm doing mostly road touring, pavement touring, then a low trail bike is more fun. If I'm doing something that's a lot of rocky steep descents, then a high trail bike for me is more comfortable because I don't have to micromanage the steering so much. And we're gonna do one last thing here. So we're gonna hop back onto my favorite website, Bike Insights, and let me see how I can do this. You can actually search by trail. So if you have a trail figure that you like, you can just punch it in here. So let's see, we'll do trail, choose trail, and we'll do 30 to 40. So I'm searching for a low trail bike. Let's see what it comes up with. So what you would expect: Ocean Air Cycles Rambler, definitely low trail; NFE Explorer, Crust Romancer. So if you're wondering what low trail bikes are out there currently on the market, then this will give you a good list. So let's change this filter up. Let's say you want just kind of a roady bike experience in the front, something just classic road front end handling. We'll put in 50 to 60 millimeters as a trail number. See what it comes up with. It's thinking. So that's pretty surprising. PLA looks like a big herky bike, but this tells me that the front end is actually going to be more responsive. You've got Black Mountain Cycles Road. What do we have here? Soma Wolverine. I reviewed this and I would agree with that. All City Mr. Pink, their classic road bike. Midnight Special based on endurance road geometry. What else? You get your Trek Madones, your Damanis, your Amonda. So, and the Cannondale road bike line. So as you can see, road bikes typically falling within this range. So I hope this video helped kind of demystify trail and put those numbers into actual feelings. Again, I'm going to pop this graphic up. check out our bicycle flavor wheel. When I do bike reviews, I'm kind of referring to this more and more. So when you hear me use the word trail and throw out a number, this is what I'm trying to get at here. Definitely made this as kind of a resource. I've been really unhappy with how bike reviews have been done in the past. Most reviewers don't pin it down to something on the frame. It just feels too subjective. So this is, I know reviews are still subjective, but this is my way to kind of anchor it in some kind of number or something. So if you guys like this video, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. It's one of the ways that makes this channel viable. And if you're trying to decide between two bikes and like how I do a deep dive on topics like this, you can book your own Bike Whisperer session. We can nerd out for 45 minutes, go through all your bike options. So hopefully I can guide you to the right bike that will meet your expectations. And I think that's it. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and as always, keep the selfless side down.